Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, 다들 하지 뻔한 이야기. I want to talk paddles, okay? And I want to get Collin's take on, and we could just talk about like paddlegate version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like just your general take on the issues with deflection, surface roughness, testing, the discrepancy between being able to play certain paddles in MLP, PPA, but not MLP and all that. I mean, generally, like, how much of a difference do you think having a hot paddle makes, or having an overly gritty paddle? Like, this paddle tech, how much of a factor is it in pickleball right now?
Yeah, how much time do we have? We could be here a very long time. Definitely, it's been a hot button topic for a while now. And the paddle does make a very big difference right now, where I feel like a few years ago, more or less all the paddles were the same. Most of them were fiberglass. Electrum was the first one to come out with that carbon fiber surface. And then everyone started to mimic that, and everything changed. And then the power went up as well. So having a really good paddle, to me, makes a difference in the sense that when you're counterpunching, if you can just get the paddle into position, if you have a flamethrower over paddle, it's just going to hit the ball back so much harder. So we had the delaminated issue earlier this year, and it was making players that, no disrespect, that were 4-5, 5-0 players, hitting the ball harder than top pros, which I don't think is appropriate, and nor is it safe. There were a few times where I was playing against some paddles where I was like, I don't even feel safe right now. I want to put on some protective goggles if that's how hard you can hit the ball. Because if you miss high, there's no way you can get out of the way. So that becomes a safety issue. Fortunately, we got the DLAM issue sorted out quite a bit. I feel like our testing procedures now, at least it's a big deterrent for people to use those sort of paddles. And honestly, it's pretty easy to tell when a paddle's delaminated.
Right.
Versus something like exit speed ratio or the deflection test, that's much harder to measure. So I do feel like we need to go to a better test. The deflection test is not great. And the reason being, it can really vary quite a bit. And my brother did a podcast, I think, with you guys that got into the specifics, and he can talk way more technical than I can on that. But Major League Baseball uses an exit speed ratio and coefficient of restitution. So both of those tests are more accurate. And essentially, it's more pure, where it's like, all right, if we throw the ball into the paddle at a given speed, how hard does it come off the paddle? It doesn't matter how thin the paddle is, how thick, what surface, whatever. Here's what the limit is, and if it exceeds it, you're not allowed to use the paddle. So if we get to that test, and I've talked to Carl Schmitz a bit on that, they do want to move to that test. It's just going to be more expensive, and it's going to be more time-consuming. So once we get to that, I feel like we'll have to decide where do we want to set the limit, because obviously there's a limit right now in terms of deflection. But I think it would make more sense if we kind of got together as players and tours and said, hey, where should the limit be? Because you look at the points right now, and women's doubles is actually more entertaining to watch in many ways because you have more extended firefights. And what some people complain about right now is at the top level on the male side, the dink rallies last forever. And they're like, well, why is that? And the reason is when you're in a dink rally and you want to speed the ball up, there's a high level of risk. Because if somebody like Deckel gets on top of a counterpunch with a really hot paddle like he uses, the point is just over. Like, you will not be getting that back. Versus the ladies, they have a lot of power and they have powerful paddles, but they don't have as much. And their court positioning is not usually as far up towards the line, so they can usually get the next one back. And that's when you get those great extended firefights. Not that it doesn't happen on the male side, but it happens less, because the risk is so much more. So I feel like the points would start to be better again, or more like what they used to be if you lessened the deflection. So if everyone had less of a hot paddle, I think the risk of attacking would be lessened and more people would speed up the ball. And that's another component to it, the spin, where you can generate enough spin to get the ball below the level of the net on a speed up on a relatively higher ball. Maybe it's still below the level of the net, but if you can dip it enough, then you can start these firefights, and then I feel like the points will be accelerated, and it could be more fun to watch. A lot of people talk about the long dink rallies and like, oh, I don't like it, or this or that. I would caution people to really think twice about that, because it is kind of nice to see the different styles of play. Maybe the women's game is faster and the guys' game is slower. You get to see the chess match, so to speak, on the dink rallies and moving the ball around and why we're putting it there. So there's definitely some thought you need to put into it, but the paddle technology, I feel, is a lot more important than people think. And it's really, there's a testament to that is how different the guys' game is played versus the ladies' game?
Hell of an answer. We were just talking about when you came on, when it was you, me, and Casey Patterson, and you and Casey just went off for like 20 minutes, and I just sat there without contributing a thing.
That was a good podcast interview for sure. Casey and I hit it off. I had never talked to Casey more than a couple minutes at a time before that.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of similarities. We could probably fire up the recast of that at some point. There were some good highlight clips. For
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like, I'm a fan of when you just kind of go into these rabbit holes. So
we could dive even deeper into that rabbit hole for sure.
Well, what's your understanding of the way that? So I think we all kind of know at this point how spin is attempted to be regulated, and it's regulated by surface roughness, right? Yes. So I think it's pretty well understood how that's done. Mm-hmm. The different standards across MLP, PPA, across paddles, but I don't even fully understand currently how deflection is being tested. I know there's basically the only thing, as I understand it, and let me know if you understand it differently, the only thing that's currently going on site at a PPA tournament is a basically ultrasound to see whether the face of the paddle is adhered to the core. And if there's separation, that paddle can be eliminated or disqualified.
Yes. So at PPA, they have more limited equipment. I think MLP has a bit more at their disposal. I think Brooks Wiley told me that they took, it was like 24, 28 paddles out of play at the last MLP event due to them being over the limit in some way. So that's interesting to me that if you have some higher level tech equipment, you can start to take other paddles out of play that would maybe pass to PPA. So longer term, I feel like we need a solution, and it might be as simple as, warning the paddle manufacturers that they can't exceed these limits or there will be harsh penalties. And then the problem may go away on its own, sort of like the grit limit, where you saw the fiasco that happened last year, and essentially the penalties became a little bit more harsh and everyone was deterred from potentially going over the limit. So I know that the paddles that I get...
Not everyone.
Huh, what's that?
Nothing gone.
The paddles that I get from Yola, they test them beforehand to make sure that they're within that margin of error, make sure that you want to get it as close to the limit as possible, obviously, for performance, but you don't want to go over the limit so you're not cheating the system. So that's something I feel like more companies are doing for the pro players. And obviously it makes a difference at the amateur levels as well. But as long as it's not way, way over, I don't feel like they're going to gain a huge advantage. The main thing you really have to take out of play is the outliers, where somebody can't be using a paddle that has 60, 70 grit when the limit's 40, because then essentially you're making that player have a big advantage over other people because they don't have that equipment. They're better simply because they have better equipment, which is defeating the whole purpose of having rules. Mm-hmm. And then you see some different loopholes that are coming in where it's an average of 6 directions when they measure the surface roughness test. And what some companies figured out is if we make one direction really smooth and one direction really rough, you're still going to get a lot more spin because one direction of the grooves matters a lot more than the other. So you have to close a loophole like that.
That company sounds real smart.
They sound real smart. I mean, there needs to be a rule put in place to where it can't exceed a certain number, because essentially it's just getting around the rules again. And obviously saying that you want to up the surface roughness is an entirely different conversation, but the intent of the rules is to make sure that people can't get around the system. So definitely it's a learning process, and pickleball is a very new sport, and it's something that every sport goes through, and Major League Baseball is still amending their rules with the different bats and deflections and what have you. So it's no surprise that pickleball is having these issues. It's not like there's a bunch of nefarious activity going on. Every sport goes through this, and it's just a matter of making sure you prioritize that everyone's playing under the same rules.
So how would
As you could probably see, I'm wearing my Viore pants, as I always am. I wear them everywhere. Zane is wearing his Viore shirt. So you can go to viore.com/thedink, and you will get, I think it's 20% off purchases over $75. And Viore is like the best brand for on-court, off-court, lounging, showing up to a party, you name it. And we wear it constantly. And we'd wear it even if they weren't a partner of ours. Fiore.com/thedink.